talking about. What we're going to explore together during our session this morning, it's morning here for me in the US, is a key component of Montessori philosophy and pedagogy, which is called normalization. We'll figure out what that means. We'll also explore how that connects to this idea of peace, how it is a pathway to peace. But before we do that, I'd like to share just a few details about me as the host and creator of this presentation. It might be a refresher for some of you, but for any of you who are new, it'll give you just a little bit of insight about who I am and how and why I'm qualified to present this information to you all today. So my name is Heather White. I am a former Montessori classroom teacher, administrator, and in-home caregiver with more than 15 years of experience in the world of Montessori. I currently work as an educational coach. I work in multiple roles with the Center for Guided Montessori Studies, including as the alumni, conference, webinar, and professional development coordinator, and also as an instructional guide supporting adult learners who are working to receive their Montessori certification. I'm also an adjunct professor at Sarasota University, which is the only accredited institution of higher education dedicated solely to Montessori studies. I'm also a blog writer and content creator for several organizations, including the American Montessori Society, Guide and Grow, and Miru's Toys. I hold certifications from the American Montessori Society at the 3 to 6 and 6 to 9 age levels, and also have experience working with the 0 to 3 and 9 to 12 populations. I have a master's degree in education with a concentration in Montessori studies and an education specialist degree in school psychology. I have an anti-bias, anti-racist certificate from the American Montessori Society. I'm a nationally certified Montessori coach and a nationally certified school psychologist.
Before we proceed, Ms. White, if you allow me, there is a concern expressed on the chat box about the sound. I'm not sure whether it's from me or from you. So, ladies and gentlemen, as Ms. White's gonna resume her presentation on the chat, we know whether this is from all of us, like from Ms. White as well as from me, or if it is just on my end, so that I can further double check the sound system on my end. Very sorry about this interruption, Ms. White, so you may proceed, please.
No worries at all. Yes, we want to make sure everyone can hear. So during our time together, we're going to start, like I said, by discussing what normalization is. And then we'll discuss the root of this word normal within the process of normalization. What does that word mean and how does it relate to this process of normalizing that takes place in Montessori? And then we'll discover how Montessori practical life activities and experiences lay the foundation for this process of normalization to occur, and how joyful work, the prepared environment, and also following the child all inspire this process of normalization. And then finally, we will end our time together exploring the gifts that normalization brings. And part of that is that peace that arises, right? So for those of you who have been with me before, I love to start my presentations with a quote to help us kind of focus in on the topic of our presentation and also to provide us with some inspiration as we start to dive in and learn more. So in her book, The Secret of Childhood, Maria Montessori said, "But in our specially prepared environments, we see them all at once fix themselves upon some task. And then their excited fantasies and their restless movements disappear altogether. A calm, serene child, attached to reality, begins to work out his elevation through work. Normalization has been achieved." So you can see here that what Maria Montessori is describing as normalization is this specially prepared environment that allows children to really dive deep and focus in on a task that's meaningful to them. It's when they do so that that restless movement, what she's calling excited fantasies, right? All that excited energy starts to dissipate and this calm, serene energy develops. And that is what Maria Montessori has described as normalization. According to the American Montessori Society, normalization is a natural development. It's a natural developmental process that's exhibited by this love of work or this love of activity, concentration, self discipline, and joy in accomplishment. This joy in accomplishing meaningful, rewarding, intrinsically rewarding tasks. It's not an activity that is done to pacify someone else or at the direction of someone else. It's something that is intrinsically motivating, something that the child finds joy and pride in just within themselves. Dr. Maria Montessori observed that children enrolled in Montessori programs exhibit this process of normalization through what she called repeated periods of uninterrupted work. We often refer to it as the uninterrupted work cycle. So it's this block of time that children are given to prepare that or to engage with materials within this prepared environment, right? All the materials are carefully selected to fit their needs, their interests, their age levels, their developmental patterns. And it's all laid out for them in a way that entices them, it draws them in to explore more. And it's this uninterrupted period of being able to access the environment in that way, to work freely, as she says, and at their own pace, choosing their own activities. That's when normalization starts to develop. A normalized child then is what we would describe as happy, well adjusted, exhibiting positive social skills. These are the qualities that we're looking for when we're talking about a child who has become normalized. So then what does this word normal mean, right? The term normalization has at its root the word normal. And what does normal mean? In a group of people, even here today, that are so vastly different, normal can look very different from one person to another. So what do we mean when we say normal? Um, just because one child can accomplish a task at a certain age or by a certain time in a school year doesn't mean that all children are able to do that at the same time. So, what we want to remember is just as we are all a very different group of individuals here today, a group of children is very different. And there's a wide range of development. And the same, even if it's the same group of children from one year to the next, they're all the same age, maybe they're even all the same gender, you will still see a large variety in their skill set and the pace at which they develop. Every single child is unique, and there are lots of different factors that influence when and how they will achieve different milestones. So the range of what we consider normal when we're looking at it through a holistic Montessori lens is really quite broad. So this process of normalization really starts and focuses in on individual children. So normalization begins when a child wants to do something, understands how to do it, and then actually does it. This process starts to establish a connection between the child and their environment. And by interacting with real objects, engaging in real life activities, having these really meaningful experiences, children start to develop concentration. And it's that development of concentration then that starts to lead towards peace. It's that pathway to peace because concentration is the root of that process of normalization. So when we say normal, that's really what we're looking for is concentration. Teaching children to begin to take care of themselves and their surroundings happens very naturally in a Montessori classroom or a Montessori home through what we call practical life activities. For those of you who might have been able to join me several sessions ago, we talked about these. In fact, we talked about it for the elementary age child, for children in general, or just for people in general, right? Because practical life activities happen in the workforce as well for us as adults. It's things that we learn how to do that are practical in nature. But in the classroom, these practical life lessons really lay a strong foundation for a child's overall development. By dedicating time to these activities and including lessons on things like manners, how to respectfully interact with one another. We call these grace and courtesy lessons in the Montessori world. By doing these things and dedicating time to them, we start to be able to see the benefits. Children's ability to focus improve, their sense of calm and order, that normalization we're looking for, prevails. For instance, if you watch a child carefully roll up their mat, so in Montessori classrooms, it's very common to work on rugs on the floor, mats on the floor. So watching a child carefully roll up their work mat when they've finished a work, or carrying a tray very carefully with walking feet and two hands, really honing in and focusing on that tray to make sure they're not spilling anything that's on it, or even just tucking in a chair, pushing in a chair when they stand up. All of these really small experiences become very rewarding for the child. They increase that sense of concentration and this order and calmness, this peace, if you will, that normalization starts to prevail. So then let's hone in a little bit more on this idea of grace and courtesy, right? These are the way that we help children learn how to respectfully interact with one another, how to develop social skills, if you will, or manners. So, grace and courtesy activities help children become oriented to this environment that we've prepared for them. You'll hear that term a lot in Montessori, the prepared environment. And what that means is that, again, we've set up the environment in a way that it appeals to the children that it houses, that it has materials at their height, that it has activities that suit their needs, their interests, their developmental levels. And everything is available for them to explore freely. We're promoting their independence. They don't need to ask if they can do something. Everything is set up in a way that they're able to explore very freely and independently. So, with the grace and courtesy lessons, we're helping the children orient themselves to this environment that we've carefully prepared. And they also, these experiences serve as tools for how to function in the classroom and outside the classroom, right? Because social skills, manners, all of these things are going to not only be beneficial for the relationship amongst children in the classroom, but also their relationship with their family members or experiences that they have in public with people that they might not know. Um, and it's also going to help them learn how to use the classroom materials and also how to engage in a way that gets their needs met, but is also kind and develops this awareness of how their actions impact other people and their surrounding environment. These lessons are really important for establishing respect. It helps the child establish respect for themselves and for other people, which is absolutely an essential part of this path to normalization that we're discussing. Grace and courtesy lessons are really wonderful ways to start a new school year as we hope to move towards normalization. Some favorite back to school grace and courtesy activities are things like how to greet one another, how to roll a rug or a mat, like we were just talking about, how to tuck in or push in a chair, and asking to observe or to participate. So in Montessori classrooms, we not only encourage children to ask, if they can join someone in doing an activity, but there are certain works that maybe are only intended for one child or two children. But if that third child or that second child still has an interest, we encourage them to learn how to ask how if they can observe. So this involves, just walking over and very politely, how to politely interrupt and ask if you can sit and watch. So these are all really wonderful things that we introduce at the beginning of a new school year to help lay that solid foundation, that pathway to normalization and that pathway to peace. That's how we're really paving it right from the start. We've talked a lot so far about how joyful work or meaningful work are key to developing what we're calling normalization or this peaceful, serene atmosphere. So, what does that mean? What is joyful work? So, focused normalization occurs really organically when a child is focusing, they're concentrating, they're deeply engaged in the task that they're doing. When a child really enjoys what they're doing, they become deeply involved and develop this sense of self discipline. And it's this self discipline that's the very first step towards normalization. So instead of labeling children as good or naughty, if we start to recognize that a child's behavior reflects their efforts to coordinate and to organize all of their internal processes, it's their way of explaining what they need to us, right? Then we can start to appeal to that need and draw them in ways that bring them this sense of joy. And if we're able to do that, you'll see that things that appear messy and chaotic start to calm and feel more orderly. Maria Montessori actually says, when talking about this process specifically, that normalization is no less than conversion from disorder, clumsiness, and chaos to steady, joyful work. So achieving joyful work then really should not be just something that we're hoping for, but really should be the goal in classrooms and throughout our lives, right? As adults, whether that's in the workplace or at home with our families, we all want to be engaged in things that bring us joy and helping children connect to what that is in the classroom, right? Understanding what it is that they're trying to explain to us through some of these behaviors that we might think of or initially perceive as naughty, right? If we can kind of shift our perspective and see that as this disorder, this clumsiness, this chaos, and determine what it is that they're needing and how we can connect them to work joyfully, meaningfully, then we start to see that process of leading towards normalization where this calm and peace and serenity develops. So then how does the environment itself play a role in that process? So I've talked again quite a bit so far already about the prepared environment. So the Montessori classroom is what's called the prepared environment. A Montessori home might also be referred to as a prepared environment. Really, what this means is a space that's carefully curated to meet the needs of the children that it houses. It offers a variety of materials that appeal to the children's interests, their developmental levels, their sensitive periods. If you were here again several classes ago, sensitive periods are spans of time that children go through in which they have a heightened ability to gain a new skill or master some knowledge. And it's a really specific window within which those skills and that knowledge just come so easily for a child. So we have this awareness of children's development of when these sensitive periods happen, along with children's individual interest and their specific development, right? And that's what's guiding the materials that we're putting in the classroom and the way we're preparing that space. So, for instance, if a child recognizes this need within them, this internal need to strengthen the muscles in their fingers, right? This is something that happens very naturally. It's why children begin to want to hold things, pick things up with what we call their pincer grasp, right? They start to want to pick up really small things, hold a spoon, and they're really preparing their fingers to be able to feed themselves, to write. It's all of these practical experiences that they're preparing themselves for. So if they've noticed that need internally, they're being drawn by that sensitive period, then they might start to choose things in the classroom like a transferring work, whether that's with a spoon or a pair of tongs or tweezers, a pouring work. And these things are not just activities that help prepare them by developing their fine motor skills, they're also teaching them self-care. If I'm learning how to spoon something, transfer something with a spoon, or pour liquid from one container to another, I'm beginning to learn how to feed myself, how to pour myself a drink, right? All of these really basic self-care activities, practical life activities. A child might begin, if again, they're trying to develop those fine motor skills, they might work with what we call the knobbed cylinders in the classroom. This is a block. There are four of them, and they have cylinders within them that have little knobs on the top. And they vary in diameter and height. There's different versions for the different four blocks, but the idea is that the child takes them all out and has to find where they go back in their specific spot that they belong in. And they begin to develop this visual acuity of diameter and height. And by doing that, by picking up the little knob on the top, again, they develop this sense of spatial awareness and this pincer grasp. They're developing those fine motor skills that they have this internal draw. What we have in the classroom, another material we call the metal insets, which are shapes. There's a variety of shapes. There's triangles, circles, squares, quatrefoils, which is really just like a rounded triangle. Coloring those also enhances a child's pincer grasp. While math beads, right, counting the tiny math beads we have in the classroom increases their fine motor skills and boosts their number sense. For specific academic skills, a child learning number recognition might engage with a material we have called the sandpaper numbers. These are numbers that are written on wooden blocks and sandpaper. So the child gets this rich sensorial experience of feeling the letter, hearing the letter, seeing the letter. Or perhaps the tens board, which is a math material where the child learns to count by tens. So all of these materials have been really, really carefully designed by Maria Montessori to meet these internal needs and interests that have been observed for hundreds of years now in children of this specific age. The variety of options that are available to practice even just one skill is very intentional in a Montessori classroom because it's designed to be able to provide the right materials at the right time to support a child's development in a way that appeals to their individual interests. And it's these simple, uninterrupted activities that are provided and prepared in this Montessori environment in the classroom that really draws the children in and fosters that uninterrupted, deep sense of concentration that leads to normalization. And that brings us to the idea of following the child. So this is a phrase that Maria Montessori used. And I want to add here because I think this is one of the misconceptions about Montessori, is the idea of following the child, which might come across in a way that seems that children just get to do whatever they want, which I know is a myth about Montessori. And the quote from which this phrase is derived from Maria Montessori, actually says, follow the child, but follow as his leader. And so what that means is we're paying attention, we're observing what we've talked about so far, children's needs, their interests, their developmental levels, and we're following them, we're following their lead in that regard. but we're doing so in a way of knowing what comes next. What do I need to provide to the child to prepare them for what comes next? So that's how we're acting as their leader. So then what does this phrase mean, following the child? The multitude of lesson possibilities that can be presented in the classroom, like we've just discussed, combined with the careful observation that Montessori teachers are known for, really come together to allow this natural organic process where the children become normalized, where this process of normalization occurs. Much more so than if children were being told what to do or what they couldn't do all day long, right? That looks very different. If I'm a child, I'm probably going to push back. I'm going to get jittery, fidgety. You're going to see some of that chaotic movement that Maria Montessori talked about. But if I'm allowed to explore things that are interesting to me, I'm engaging in that joyful work. Once I'm able to do that, that's when concentration arises, and that's when normalization starts to occur. So it's this trust in the child that if we prepare the environment in a way and we step back and we observe, that we're able to see normalization really develop through the child themselves. And that's what it means to follow the child, knowing that if we prepare the environment, if we're aware of what the children need, what their interests are through this careful, systematic observation, and we respond accordingly, that then we can just step back and trust the child and know that normalization, that this pathway to peace will happen on its own. So through normalization, then, children really start to understand this inner potential that they have. By placing them in these carefully prepared environments and allowing them to engage in this meaningful work, we help them become normalized. And it's this process then that enables children to become more calm, more peaceful, more active. And when we say active, we don't necessarily mean that erratic movement, right? This is very purposeful movement. It's this active participation and engagement with the materials and their environment, with one another, right? It's very purposeful, it's meaningful. And that's then how they're able to use all aspects of their innate intelligence. They're engaging socially and emotionally. They're exploring academically and intellectually, cognitively, if you will, with all of the materials that are there. And it's that uninterrupted work time where we're allowing them to have that active engagement that promotes their independence and also then promotes the development of normalization. And once we've given children this ability to normalize, some characteristics that typically reveal themselves are a love of order. Children really start to crave a sense of order, routine, normalcy. They develop this love of work. I will never forget one of my favorite memories when I was an elementary Montessori teacher. We have a material that's called the Timeline of Life, and it outlines life on Earth from the very first species that was identified to present day. Obviously, not all of them are there, but it does go through various eras throughout history and periods throughout history and shows when different species started to come into existence, when different species went through periods of extinction, when ice ages occurred. And through all of this, we are able to help children understand life on Earth. All of that to say, I had two boys who were in third grade. So they were 8 years old, and they were really, really fascinated by this idea of the timeline of life. And they decided that they wanted to create their own timeline. And this material, to give you an idea, it stretched from one side of my classroom to the other. I would say it was probably about 20 feet long. And these children um, used what we call butcher block paper, which you can unroll and it creates a long kind of poster, if you will. And they created one the same length of the timeline of life and did their own research and came up with their own developed their own timeline of life of species they were interested in that existed on Earth from the very beginning, the very first species on our planet to current day. And it's that love of work, it's that concentration, that independence, this self-discipline to be able to do that for days and days is what we see happening. That's what's meant by this idea of normalization. You also see children who are normalized. And I think, we can start to expand this idea to people who are normalized, human beings who are normalized. Think about yourselves, your family members, your coworkers. If you see these characteristics start to reveal themselves, concentration, this love of silence or working alone. And that's really when that deep concentration is happening. This power to choose, this independence, this initiative, self discipline, joy, all of those things come about, become evident when normalization exists. Above all else, when we're talking about work with children, what's most important is going back to that idea of following the child. We really need to trust in them. By following their individual curiosities, children naturally will be able to guide themselves, deeply understand what they're learning, and then progress at their own pace. And that's the key to achieving normalization. And again, I want to loop back and make it relevant to some of your experiences as adults as well. Think about in your professional experiences, if someone really took the time to get to begin to understand things you were curious about or things you were interested in, and then set the stage and your let's say your professional world, right? Set the stage where you were able to focus in on those things, to follow those interests, to really deeply understand those topics. You too then would begin to progress at your own pace and begin to achieve this normalization, this pathway to peace. You'd start to see many of these things become evident, this love of work, this joy, this self-discipline, independence. It's that understanding that someone trusts in you and has prepared the situation in such a way that you're able to lean into your individual curiosities that is the pathway to peace or the pathway to normalization. So to end our time together today, I have a couple more quotes that will give us some inspiration before we open it up for questions. So again, in her book, The Secret of Childhood, Maria Montessori also said, what is to be particularly noted in these child conversions is a psychic cure, a return to what is normal. Actually, the normal child is one who is precociously intelligent, who has learned to overcome himself and to live in peace, and who prefers a disciplined task to futile idleness. When we see a child in this light, we would more properly call his conversion a normalization. So, what she's saying is we need to shift our perspective of children, shift our understanding from seeing them as idle beings who are rambunctious and have this um, meaningless energy, right? To seeing that if we prepare the space and give them what they need, they are very intelligent. They do prefer to be very peaceful and to be disciplined. We just need to set the environment in a way that allows them to lean into those natural urges and instincts and to go down that path of normalization. And one last quote for you here. This is from E.M. Standing and his book called Maria Montessori, Her Life and Work. And E.M. Standing says, the crowning characteristic of a group of normalized children is joy. It pervades the little community like a perfume and is as hard to describe as it is easy to perceive. So simply put, during normalization, the child is really becoming their best possible self and is doing so without effort and with complete joy. And again, I'm going to stretch you to think about that in regards to your experiences as an adult, be it personally, professionally, um, but the pathway to peace, the way to achieve normalization, really is by finding things that bring you joy, by finding things that are meaningful and purposeful to you individually. That's how you find your own peace, your own sense of normalization. And then that begins to become contagious, if you will, but in a positive way to those around you as well. All right, so I just wanted to say thank you so much before we open it up here for questions. It's a joy to be here as always. I have my contact information here on the screen if you have any questions after our time together today that we don't get to. Please feel free to send me an email or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I've also shared my website along with my social media accounts, which can be found at the handle at Montessori.matters. And on these platforms, I share Montessori and other education and parenting related content that hopefully you'll find helpful. So I encourage you